My name is Renee Braun, and I'm an independent filmmaker based in Okanagan Valley, BC. It's been said that artists and artisans view the world differently. They notice details that others may miss. And they see a world of inspiring possibilities, where one person just sees mud on their shoe, a potter might see a bowl. Where another sees construction waste, a metalsmith might see a soaring eagle. Where one person sees junk, a drummer will hear the rhythms. When COVID hit, my business had to shut down. All my projects were either canceled or put on hold. It was a tough and scary time. And I wondered, how are my fellow artisans doing? So I reached out to some of my fellow creators to hear their stories and ask them what did they do when life handed you a pandemic. What beauty did they find despite COVID limitations? What innovations grew from COVID shutdowns? What opportunities did they discover when COVID changed everything?
My name is Jennifer Dirks-Curzan, and I'm the owner of Hivology. And Hivology is an apiculture company located in Kelowna, BC.
Hi, my name is Nikki. My company name is Nikki Fine Art. I have been in the Okanagan creating art for since 2005.
My name's Scott Moran. I'm a forager. That means I collect wild plants and mushrooms. So it started with mushroom picking. I'll often joke and say, hey, I'm just a mushroom picker.
You know, like right from when I was a child, growing up in the Lower Mainland, we had a farm. It was a hobby farm where we had animals, we had a garden, and I was always, you know, in my bare feet, getting my hands dirty in the garden with my dad. And, you know, my dad would, you know, he would plant something and grow something, and I had to come along and undo it and make it better. And, well, what if we grew it this way? Or what if we did this? And so my dad would always say to me, Jenny, you're smart as a beekeeper. In Hawaii was actually where I did a lot of my university studies for my agriculture science degree. And I mean, it's such a beautiful place to do, you know, trials and studies. And it's also where the famous Kona queen originates from. So honeybees are European in descent, but the best queens on the planet are made in Kona, Hawaii. And so my studies will always, you know, continue and grow there. When I was there, I also discovered that single-use plastics were banned, being a small island in the middle of the Pacific. And so, you know, that's a place that really respects the land, and they, you know, they're always trying to improve things and do better. And so the beeswax wraps that I create with the beeswax from my own hives were actually the very first item that I created before I even had honey to sell. It's what allowed me to purchase my first beehives. That's what funded my whole project. So the project, Hivology, was actually a school project. And my professor said, you know, like, when are you opening this company? And I said, no, this is just my project. And she said, well, I recommend that you start this right away. There's a need for this, but I'm warning you, if you do it, I'll never see you again. And she was right. So, you know what, I'll probably be 90 years old by the time I actually finish that degree, and that's okay.
Years ago, I used to paint on stage to music, and that was when I first discovered so many of my techniques. I was on a stage for maybe an hour or 2 hours, depending on how long I was asked to stay up there. And that experience of putting color down and creating texture really, I guess, encouraged and pushed me into a new way and new form of expression. Because I grew up in the Okanagan and I've been surrounded by the natural beauty we live around, I find I see mountain shapes, even though I don't mean to, they come in naturally. just the way I move my palette knife across the canvas. Those first few marks that I make on the canvas really shape the rest of the piece. And so I would say, the themes of, when I traveled to Hawaii, that it took about a year or two later before I started painting that theme. It just was tucked away and I thought, oh, I really want to try this. And then I started working in those color palettes, ocean palettes, and people would say, aren't you from the Okanagan? Don't you live in BC? And I'm like, yeah, but I'm inspired by just that movement, the water, the flow, the energy, the splashing of the water and the sparkle on the surface. So those kinds of things are always appearing in my work, I find, in my abstracts.
So I actually ended up taking 16 months off. So I did 2 winters and 1 whole growing season and went to Europe. So I didn't have a full plan when I went there, but I did end up, after a couple of months, getting a job in the UK. And so I was working for a company that supplied all the fancy restaurants in London and throughout the UK with just all their wild plants, basically. We didn't really do any mushroom picking. And so my first day out picking, we picked like 5 different things. We were picking by the sea and the farming fields and the forest, just all over. And that was like really amazing. And I think I learned a lot there that I wouldn't have otherwise, like especially becoming an expert with greens, because the prices there for things, since we're selling to the Michelin star restaurants in London, they're willing to pay quite a bit just for all those nice little leafy greens that they garnish their plates with. And of course, they can't really get by with just like parsley and chard. They need, variety. And that was also at a time when wild food was really taking off in popularity, mostly thanks to a restaurant called Noma in Denmark. So they're one of the first ones to use exclusively wild food. And of course, they're in Northern Europe, so they have a shorter growing season than we do here in the Okanagan by quite a bit. And they said, we're not using coffee, we're not using chocolate, we're not using olive oil, we're not using wine. And they had started that just a couple years before I started working in Europe, sort of revolving around, selling to restaurants. So that was the perfect timing for me to get into it because it was just really taking off, like, using wild plants and things like that in your food. That was like kind of the beginning of its peak of popularity.
I love what I do. I feel so privileged to be in the arts and creating on my own. I am self-taught and I'm very proud of that as well because I feel like I've grown and developed my craft in big ways over the years. Some of the art I'm really proud of. Well, I'm proud of a lot of it. But over the last year, over this COVID season, I have been exploring a lot of Okanagan landscapes, which are much more detailed. There's a lot of interest and contrast and highlights and shadows and beautiful scenery that I've been painting. And so that I would say is, my smaller art selection. And then I also move into larger abstracts where they're much more free, broad brush strokes, bigger tools, lots of cool layering and colors and textures. And so they're completely different art forms, I would say, art expression, I would say.
I have many apiaries throughout the Okanagan, and through those apiaries and colonies, I create different products that are sold at the farmers markets, specialty stores, wineries, grocery stores. So an apiary it's basically just a collection of bees in one area. So it would be like, for instance, my largest apiary is on an apple farm in Kelowna that consists of about 20 beehives or bee colonies. And each colony can contain anywhere from 30,000 bees to 60,000 bees. So it's just a collection of bees in one area.
So during my busy season, a weekly schedule for me would look like starting with the accumulation of fresh products. So say in the spring, that would mostly be leafy greens and vegetables. Then throughout the week, I have to deliver them, and my week always sort of climaxes with the Saturday morning farmers market. And then once that's over, 1 o'clock, I feel like I can just kind of breathe a little bit. And then aside from that, like say I might start harvesting first thing Monday morning. One thing that people might not realize is in the Okanagan with our hot weather, sometimes you can only work early in the morning because the leafy greens might be wilted in the afternoon, so they crisp up overnight. So there's a lot of early mornings, and sometimes I can take a break in the afternoons, and then of course I have to work with the restaurant schedules, so that means driving around between 1 and 5, constantly avoiding rush hour traffic in Kelowna. And that would be more of the spring, and then in the fall, which is kind of my second busy season, I'm working in the West Kootenay Monashee area picking mushrooms. So I might spend up to 3 or 4 nights in a camp that I've set up temporarily. So sleeping in a tent, cooking outdoors, and then I have to bring everything I've accumulated out there for mushrooms back to town. Have time to sell it, do the market, all that. So that time of year can be very, very busy. And then fortunately, as soon as that's done, it's the off season. So I get a good break after that.
When you stumble on those things where you find there's an ease and comfort in it, there's something, with me, I've always just been led by that intuitive nature in myself. And so that was a big deciding point for me. I decided, yep, this is what I want to do, and this is how I want to continue to, provide for myself.
So typically my days are actually split into 2, and normally I will beekeep first thing in the morning. So starting at 4 a.m., I'm awake. So I'm basically on the same circadian sleep-wake rhythm as the bees are. And so as the sun comes up, the bees are also waking up. So I'm up early, 4 a.m., must have coffee. 2 cups of coffee. At the beginning of the season, I'll just take a rounded up number. You could start with 30 colonies. At the end of that 3 months, you may have split all of them or half of them. It's hard to say what each one needs. You can end up with 60 hives or more. So it's this ever expanding and contracting superorganism. All right, so for 3 months, that is what I'm doing. I'm inspecting all my hives. I'm lifting heavy equipment. Just trying to decide what each colony needs and to hopefully make the best decision. Sometimes I don't get it right, but they always do. I always say they've been doing this a lot longer than I have.
A little child who is probably under 5 years old say, "Mommy, Mommy," and she was tugging on her mom's sleeve saying, "Mommy, that was my dream I had. This painting was my dream." So I started taking notes at different shows, just what people would say. And that's actually why I keep my titles very open so people can interpret what they want. I think it's lovely. I see new things in my work when I sell to someone I know, and then I go back to their home and I see the art. I see something new every time. And so I love keeping, allowing people to share what they see, because we'll all interpret something differently and there's no right or wrong answer. And that is what I believe artists and creatives are here for, to have those different conversations with people and be okay with a critique if it comes, and as hard as it can be, but also just be open to, what people want to express, what they feel.
What a lot of people don't realize is that bees are not collecting honey for us. They're collecting it for their colonies, and it's to get them through winter. And they require at least, the studies show that those colonies require at least 60, 70 pounds of honey to get them through winter. That is their food. And that honey contains a little bit of pollen, there's propolis in there, there's honey. So there's all kinds of antibacterial agents in there as well to keep them healthy throughout the winter. And so one of the points that I like to make with my honey harvest is that I only collect what is in excess of that 70 pounds. And so you will see that all of my colonies overwinter with one very large brood box for the bees to cluster in, and then in the attic above that is their winter food. Anything over and above that is what I will collect. So some colonies are going to produce 300-400 pounds. Some colonies will produce 60 pounds in excess, and some of the smaller brand new colonies won't produce any excess. And so that has always been very important to me when I'm talking to customers about what they're buying. Is it's the sustainability. It's always animal welfare and conservation is first and foremost for Hiveology. That's what I created. So as we move into harvest, that's what I'm doing now. Is every morning I'm up at the same time. Although I noticed this morning that it's dark till about 4:20. So the days are getting shorter. So I'm out collecting honey now, harvesting honey every day, and as it's ready, I pull the honey.
I do have a really good time in the fall when I get to hang out at mushroom camp, because that's a really different crowd, which is nice. I guess that helps me stay more grounded. So yeah, there's just a bunch of us living out in the bush, out of tents and campers, and it's sort of like a old gold mining town, you know, just sort of that temporary camp. Everybody's making money, unless they're not making money. Sometimes it's not going well, and everyone's just kind of in it together.
When I grew up, I was very shy and quiet and quite reserved. And it wasn't till I started doing art and painting and creative things in my life where I started to really hear and feel my voice. And I think that was something I always desired in life, was to have a deeper connection with people. And so to sell my original art, sure, there have been ones where I've maybe cried a little or felt a little longing for that painting. But I think the reward is so much greater just to know that that piece is out there and it's bringing light to someone's home. I think the beginning of the COVID shutdown was, I was on the same page as everybody else. Everybody else was thinking the same thing. How could this be? And when Justin Trudeau shut down Canada and said, stay in your homes, don't leave your homes, don't go to work, it was obviously shock, disbelief. How could a virus to shut down the entire world? And that was a weird feeling too, to realize that everybody on the planet in that moment was thinking the same thing. Everybody had the same problem. That was a really strange feeling that I had never had before. And so, like everybody else, we thought, well, how long does this last? Is this a week? Is this a month? And so here we are, when are we at, 16, 17 months later? Some parts of the world are even further ahead than that, and we're still in it. And so when we first shut down, my initial thoughts, beyond, shock and belief, were, well, what are all the farmers going to do? Because our markets were shut down, and we've been growing food, and we reinvest all of our income and our money into buying new equipment so that we can do things better each year. The artisans and crafters were banned from the markets, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around how that felt, because I'm also a crafter, and artisans and crafters were the backbone of farmers markets. They bring this whole unique setting to the market. It's not just food, it's people that create everything, and they're a huge part of this community. And so now, not only are we not allowed to go to markets, but 5 weeks later when we return, we're told that it's essential
products only, which means consumables, food. Okay, so farmers are back to the markets. I am also a crafter, so I'm there selling my honey, but I'm not allowed to sell reusable antibacterial beeswax food wraps, which was 50% of my income. It's 50% of my company. So that's a huge hit. So of course, that's the first thing you think about is yourself. It's just human nature. How am I going to do this? And I'm thinking about all of the crafters who are, and I'm going to use the word, I know it's a strong word, but they're banned. They're banned from the market. And I'll never get over the way I felt how we were made to feel so dirty. How could I sell a bunch of carrots that came out of the ground that were dirty, but I can't sell a piece of art that these people spent, their whole winter and their time and their money and their energy, making the things that they make so that they can put food on the table. And so, sorry. So I will, when you said let's revisit that was the first thing that came to my mind, was just the how inequitable that whole thing was for everybody. And so how was it that I was not able to sell beeswax food wraps, fine, whatever. Artisans, crafters were not allowed to be there because they're considered, a risk. But you could go to any brick and mortar, any other store that carried my products or our products, and you could purchase them there. You could go to any other, grocery store, big box outlet, and you could buy crafts there. So I'm still scratching my head on that one. And I don't think we'll ever know the truth or understand why that happened, but it happened. And so I can honestly say that, everybody is back now, but the provisions that were put in place, even just on the essential people, like, oh, you must wear a mask. Of course, that everybody was wearing masks. We were all working outside. You must use tongs to take cash from people. You must spray the cash. You must put it in plastic bags. Don't touch it. And I know for a fact that at places where I shopped just to buy, my items, those people were not doing that. And so there was this huge uproar, like within my community, of artisans, of crafters, of farmers, and also a huge divide. It created a huge divide between us within the markets. I know that there were, crafters that never returned. I never saw them again. And I wonder, did they give up? Were they just crushed? So for me, I was able to work through the whole pandemic, but I had guilt doing it. How could you go to the market and not be able to buy soap to wash your hands? Isn't that what we were supposed to do? But I could go, I'm not going to name the places, you can go any other places and buy all the soap and perfume and crafts that you wanted to. Yeah, so there was this huge feeling of inequity.
So at the beginning of 2020, what I call the early isolation period, it was really challenging timing for me because that's right at the end of my off season. So November right through to March, that's a period of time where I'm kind of taking it easy. I still do a bit of work, shoveling snow and whatever, but I am really counting on there being a lot to do at the very beginning of April for at least 12 weeks. So of course, you know, things don't stop growing, but then without the farmers markets being dependable, definitely could not rely on the regular restaurant sales. And I tend to get so much diversity and like abundance in April when farms only have like a little bit of baby spinach. So I'm really able to sell a lot in a short period of time to restaurants. But yeah, I got absolutely nothing for restaurant sales.
So at the beginning of 2020, I had expected, I think what we all expected, life would carry on. You don't expect these kinds of big things to happen worldwide. And so I remember January and February were very slow months for me. And I actually had a point where I thought, is this worth it for me to continue doing this? Like, is this worth it? I felt like, you know, I had my studio at the time, and I wasn't creating a lot. I find I usually like a little bit of downtime in the winter because September, October, November, building up to Christmas is usually busy, and then I usually like to take some time off. So, you know, moving into a new year of 2020, I had high hopes because every year it seems to get better and better. And so when March hit, I didn't know what to do. I think I was a little bit stunned. I continued to take some time off to really reflect and think, like, what do I want to do here? And it took a little bit of time, to be honest, to get some momentum back and feel inspired and encouraged. And I actually had to make a hard decision to shut my studio down early on. And so I'd had that space for several years. It was home away from home for me. It's where I created majority of my art. And so letting that go is really difficult. I moved. Lots of changes were happening in my life at that point. So I feel, you know, I'm really grateful I didn't stop doing art, because it could have been easy in a sense to do that because it was so quiet. But I've hit these points in my career where it has been quiet and low. And I think, well, what would be the point? I've put so much time and energy into my business. I don't want to walk away from it. And the other thing is, I'm really alone here with my business. It's just me and myself and I. And so to talk to people about it, everybody was kind of in a state where we're just trying to figure things out. So I think back to, you know, over a year ago, and I think, wow, how far. I would have never imagined that during this season, things would be where they are for me personally in my business. You know, over this season and watching businesses around our community shut down, I think we all feel the effects of that, because that could be us. And, you know, I wonder, how close was I to stopping what I was doing? Art is too important for me to walk away from, and I'm so glad I pushed on and continued. And reflecting on this past year again, I do realize I'm one of the lucky ones, definitely. I've felt so encouraged through this hard season, and my hope is I can do that for people around me who are, you know, just hop on a call, meet someone for a walk, like just reach out more to people. So I feel like my heart is big, and I want to share my knowledge more, and really embrace the time I have with my family and friends, and have more great conversations and inspire each other a little bit more, and be there for each other, because I think we've all journeyed. It's been a tough season, and I think we've all felt so many highs and lows, maybe more lows than highs. And so I really look forward to when we can all come together again and see how we've grown in our creative abilities, and how much we've learned. And I can't wait to sit down with people and pick their brain and say, how did you do it?
So I start thinking about the fact that I am a honey company after all. I'm not a beeswax company. That's one of the products that I make and create, but I'm a beekeeper and I have honey. And so I start thinking about things that, like people are doing now, and I'm seeing more of my friends virtually. Happy hour was a thing. So, there's daily happy hours and, oh, what's that cocktail you're having? And I started to realize that, I've always realized this, but people are very, very connected to food. And so now that we could no longer, have dinner parties and do wine and cheese, I realized that we could still do it. It's just going to be virtual. And people more than ever were getting very creative in their kitchens. So again, they're having cocktails. Well, what can I do with honey and cocktails? So simple syrup entered my mind. So it's sugar-free. It's made with honey instead. So beautiful long shelf life. So I made a few infusions. I did a straight honey simple syrup, and then I did a lavender honey simple syrup. And so I collaborated with Okanagan Lavender and Herb Farm on that. So the Stewart family is beautiful, and my bees are right there, so that just made sense to me. And an Earl Grey. And so, cocktails, oatmeal, cooking, like all these different things that you could do. So I came up with that. And then I feel like people kind of got tired of the happy hour. A lot of people were gaining weight, they were drinking a lot. And so they sort of moved on with that. And then all of a sudden there was this thing where people started making sourdough bread. Not me, I'll eat it, I'll take 2 loaves. But people were making their own sourdough bread. And so I thought, well, here we go again. What can we do with sourdough bread? And so I started making some different honey infusions. And so the first honey infusion that I came up with, though, even before the bread, was teas. People were really into drinking healthy teas. And so I thought, ginger and turmeric, that makes sense. Good for your digestion. The turmeric was good for reducing inflammation. You could make tea out of it. You could roast your vegetables with it. So it's just a really great way to get ginger and turmeric into your diet. And so that one started flying off the shelves to the point where I couldn't keep up with production. So people were becoming very bougie, and things that they were posting online. This is what I'm doing with the food. So I just kept recreating, I just kept thinking to myself, I'm a honey company. And so what can I do with the honey? What do people want to do? And so a big part of the demand for products in my business is based on what people tell me and what I observe that people want to do. And I realized that it's actually very simple. People, they want food, they love food, and they love preparing food and sharing food. And so whether it was virtually or, through Instagram and Facebook posts, people were into food.
Before the pandemic, my major sources of revenue were the farmers market sales, which is only just 5 hours a week on Saturday, and then the rest of the week doing fresh sales to restaurants. And that's how I started. I'm very used to working with chefs. So even though that is a difficult way to make money, it's something I was always good at and comfortable with. And then afterwards, it became that I was able to, make the same amount of money with 0 restaurant sales for a period of time. And then when I got them back, it kind of felt just like a bonus because I was able to go without that. And I'd say I was doing a lot more online sales, doing nice little mixed packages of dried food, and then once the season started, fresh as well. So people might get 2 or 3 types of salad greens, maybe a pound of stinging nettle, and then maybe some dried mushrooms to go on the side with that. And I just drop it off at your door in a nice little paper shopping bag. And yeah, that was definitely a new one for me, and I kind of had to figure that out as things were happening in late March and April. But it worked really well, and then I'm able to do that as much as I need to until restaurant sales pick up again. The sense of community that I've gotten just from being exposed to the farmers market has been great. I find, I tend to get along really well with the producers, the food producers, and we're able to kind of nerd out talking about plants and mushrooms and stuff. And I have a lot of appreciation for what they do, because I just go out and produce every day without having to do all the work of farming and maintaining the ground and equipment and all that year-round stuff. And they have a lot of appreciation for what I do, because I bring all the things that aren't really available elsewhere, because they tend to really appreciate like just having an annual feast of mushrooms and for the different wild vegetables. So yeah, there's a lot of mutual sort of respect there, and I get to learn so much just through conversation and experiencing all the talent and excitement that we have in this area. People all of a sudden got more open-minded towards food in general. So I actually got quite a boost in the interest of my products and business, just not maybe in the way that I would depend on most years. So in April I was also doing classes, so that ended up being almost therapeutic for people. That was a lot of people's first time outside interacting with people in like weeks or months, which was a really, really good feeling. And those, you don't really have to change a thing. They're already just a small group of people. Everybody, gets to maintain their bubble and pick their own stuff, and they drive themselves to each site independently. So that really couldn't have gone better. So I had increased interest in my dried inventory. The markets, once they did start going again, people were more health conscious than ever, and wild food tends to be the most like nutrient rich food that we have available, especially in the spring with all the leafy greens. So overall it was a big boost, but I did have to do that thing they call pivoting quite a bit. But I realized I've always been pivoting, like since the very beginning of my business. Even going back to the first time I did the farmers market, it's just each day, each week, I'm just trying to figure out what to get, where to get it, and who's gonna give me money for it.
I really missed those connections with people and time together. And so with my bubble, we definitely took advantage of nature walks a lot more. I remember several weeks, so spring break of 2020, hiking a couple times a day, just getting out and exploring and walking on the earth. And so that is where I feel fed, and I feel grounded when I'm walking in nature. And so I live in a beautiful area where we have walking paths just steps from our door. And so, as we are allowed to connect with other people and do that, I would call a friend and say, let's go for a nature walk. And they happen to be creatives as well. So there'd be photo taking and later painting, kind of inspirational scenes from walks. A couple months ago, a group of us decided to do a painting challenge. So we were all local to the Okanagan, and we all decided to paint our way through a month. And we all produced such incredible work, which we ended up taking to Building in Kelowna, which was safe for people to go in, mask up, look and enjoy the art, read our stories. And so that was a really beautiful experience that came out of it. Really, it was getting creative within our means. What are we able to do, and how can we continue doing this? My hope with this is that we will come out of this and just really value and appreciate each other more and support each other more, and realize the importance of supporting local small businesses and keeping it within our, community, shopping locally. And because I know that is something that I appreciate and value. When people choose me, they could go anywhere, but then when they choose my business to support me, it means the world. And when they say, there's that saying, whenever a small business sells something, they do a happy dance. That's me to a T. It doesn't matter how big or small the piece is, the fact that someone has found you and chosen you, that feeling never goes away. And I'm so grateful, and I'm very happy to send people to other people locally, just to support small again. So
I think if there is a silver lining, within this whole pandemic and COVID, for me anyway, I think it was just feeling a little bit uncomfortable. And when you're uncomfortable, you grow. And so that's exactly what I did. I was forced to grow, and I love that. And so for me, creating all of these, just expanding my line of honey and coming up with this whole new culinary line that people, kept encouraging me to build upon. That's just been like a whole new world for me, and I love it. From that now has created this whole new urgency, and because so many of my products are seasonal and I can only do it sustainably, or I will only do it sustainably, I now have wait lists for my product. There's this old saying that farmers use, and they all know it. They're all gonna laugh when they hear me say it, but it goes like, why gamble when you could just be a farmer?
The silver lining from COVID in regards to my business would be people's minds opening up just a little bit towards food. Because we had an almost kind of food crisis, and when people were lining up at the stores, and for me it was always just like, not a joke, but in regards to having nutrient-rich food, that is something we should never have to line up for or worry about having access to. So I don't really do like protein or high-calorie food, but really nutrient-dense, sustainable food, like stinging nettles, for example, for 6 weeks. People just are opened up their minds a little bit more, and for me, I really feel it.
This coming year, as we come out of this, these COVID times, my hope is, to continue doing what I've been doing, continue at my practice, continue to connect with people, be involved more with different events that are coming up and show my art to people. And I think, again, learn from others, because I think there are so many people that I'm inspired by watching how they run their businesses. So reaching out and not being afraid to, see how they've been running things on their end. As far as plans, I think it's just, travel is definitely something I want to do. I have some, places I want to visit and create on a beach somewhere. Where that beach will be, I don't know.